It's the Fulhamish podcast, your independent voice of Fulham FC. My name's Sammy James. Welcome to the show. Today, we are looking ahead to Monday's West London derby against Brentford at Craven Cottage. We say that Chelsea is the match that we want to win the most, and Brentford is the one we like to lose the least. Or at least that's what Jack Collins says, and I've just gone along with it because it makes sense in my head. In today's podcast, we'll look ahead to that match and do the final word on Saturday's late stinger that Everton provided, courtesy of Beto, somehow being free in the box despite there being 2 minutes left of the match and about 1 million centre-backs on the pitch. I'm joined on the Thursday Club today by Jack Collins. Hello.
Hello, Sammy. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Did you have a nice holiday?
I did. I had a nice trip. I ended up working for most of it, but alas, it's better to work away from the UK a lot of the time than it is to work in it. So I jaunted around through Iberia, did a little bit of Galicia, did a little bit of Portugal. It was very, very nice. My only real shame was that I couldn't be on last week's Thursday Club because I was stuck on a train.
Yeah, it was quite funny. So me and Liz were upstairs and we got a text from Jack about 15 minutes before we were supposed to record, being like, so guys, I'm on a train and I might not make it.
I was supposed to be in about half an hour before that, and they kept being like, we'll be moving soon. And it didn't move for an hour. And I was just like, I could just really do without this.
Have they taken some hints and tips from South West Railway?
Yeah, it feels like it. To be honest, the rail system across the whole thing was brilliant, apart from this one journey where I really needed it to be smooth, where it crossed the border from Spain to Portugal. So alas, it is what it is.
But the beauty of working with a fellow Fulhamish podcast contributor is that a fellow Fulhamish podcast contributor can just step in at a moment's notice.
I thought Lizzie's debut on the Thursday Club was delightful. I had a great time listening.
As she made all of her dreams that she had as a little girl come true by being on the Thursday Club.
The big one.
Jack, let's have a final word on Everton from Saturday. Have you managed to watch it back?
I watched it live.
Oh, okay.
I got to sit down and just sort of chill and watch that game live. It was frustrating, obviously, from a Fulham perspective, but I mean, there are positives and negatives to this. I think that the way that Fulham dominated the game has to be looked at in a positive light, and I think that at some point, relatively soon, it's going to come for Fulham. There will be a game where the attack clicks, and just like we kind of got to that point last year where we saw that West Ham game and that Nottingham Forest game that Fulham just blew teams away, I feel like that's coming. I feel like that moment is coming because the chances that are being created are excellent. Fulham are slicing teams apart into the final third. Transitionally, I think we look really, really sharp. But the frustration is with the lack of potentially leadership, but also I think discipline and just people having their heads screwed on a little bit at the end of games, which is starting to get to us. Now, Fulham already dropped more points this season from winning positions than we did in the entirety of last season, which is a slight concern. I think at this point we've managed to already overtake that total. It does suggest that we are lacking something in those areas. I think there's another stat that if games finished in the 85th minute, Fulham would be in the top 4. But we'll leave that alone for a little while. The good news is that we are creating, and the chances aren't going in at the moment into the back of the net. But I do think that once the chances start to fall right, and once we start to work out exactly where everyone is supposed to be, this is still a relatively young, fresh team, which is gelling. And I think that part of our issues with leadership, we spoke about this, right, in the summer, that we saw a lot of players who were considered leaders in this team, on pitch and off it. Tim Ream, Bobby De Cordova-Reid, Joao Palhinha, Tosin, to an extent. He was at the club for a long, long time.
Yeah.
All leave the club in one go. And I think it left a little bit of a void of leadership, especially given that the other players in that leadership group, Tom Cairney, Harrison Reed, for example, haven't really been playing all that much.
And I guess probably our most natural leader on the pitch, Joachim Andersen, was suspended. That was a point that I think Jack Stroudley made on Sunday's podcast. And you know, who knows? But if he'd have been in there, you just wonder if we might have been a tad more organised.
Yeah, maybe just there's someone just being the leader at the back, but organising and, as you say, shuffling the pieces into place to make sure that these... Well, you made that point at the top that I don't know how he had that much space in the box, but it's frustrating to be like, that is organisational, that is discipline, that is keeping your heads. I think Anderson, when he came in, and we spoke about this when he came in, was supposed to come in and provide that leadership and be that kind of experienced player at the back to kind of direct his troops in the right direction so that Fulham could see off games. Now, this has happened with Anderson on the pitch as well as off it. So I'm hesitant to say that that's the be all and end all of this one. But I do think it's interesting that where that void of leadership exists, Fulham have suddenly become more flaky towards the end of games. And that's a concern. We'll come on to the Brentford game and what that means, but thankfully they seem to score at the start of games rather than the end of them. But when you kind of look at the Everton game as a whole, there's plenty to be quite proud of, I think, from a Fulham perspective. There's plenty of that where Everton came into that game in a good run. They were playing well. I think a lot of people expected Fulham to go up there and it to be a relatively even affair. That wasn't the case. There was one side completely dominant for 85 minutes of that game, and it was Fulham. And whilst Everton did put the ball in the back of the net in the first half and it was very narrowly offside, that felt like it was against the run of play. It felt like there was a 5-minute spell where Everton managed to break out of Fulham's chokehold and come away from it. And yes, we need to sort out those moments and be able to, not open up the way that we did when we were kind of turned over. But I do think that over the course of the game, the way that we played, the way that we acquitted ourselves, without, I would probably add, playing really well. I thought we were fine, but the way that we were able to just leech the life out of the game and stop Everton really feeling that they were any danger whatsoever, until it finally mattered, obviously. But that, I think, is something that Fulham can take and move forward with.
I think also, with the benefit of hindsight and a few days to sit on it, we are actually sweating the small stuff here. Now, the small stuff's incredibly important and is costing us points right now, but we aren't talking about, remember this time last year, we were talking about a fundamental problem in our team that we couldn't score goals and all of this. And whilst, yes, there are some, that we need to tighten the screws in a couple of places, we need to just dot the I's, cross the T's in a few areas. We are agonizingly close to being something exceptional here, and for large swathes of that game. So we got to take the positives that actually, on the whole, Fulham are in a very healthy place. I saw a couple of Everton reviews from fans, and so many of them are like, we've got to be better against an average team. I think people are still underestimating how good this Fulham team can be.
Maybe, but equally, I think that that's a fair point to take from an Everton perspective because, ultimately Fulham finished in the bottom half of the table last year. Yeah. After this result, we are, 11th? 10th?
I thought we were 10th. We're 10th.
So we're a mid-table side right now. Yes, okay, there's a couple of pieces away from everything ticking together, and yes, we're not there yet. And I think that matters. And whilst we can look at the positives from our perspective and say, okay, we didn't put the game to bed, we didn't kill it off, etc. I think Everton are quite right to be disappointed with their performance in that game. I didn't think they were great. And also I think that they can say at home, if we want to be moving up the table and away from a relegation battle, we need to be able to be better against teams who are currently occupying the middle of the pack. So I take their point.
I'm just trying to say, though, that I think that what Fulham is doing this season outside of Fulham circles has not been necessarily appreciated by the masses. I said it on Sunday that I think you can make a case that Fulham should have won every game this season other than Ipswich.
Yeah, I mean, look, results bias different ways, right? And I think that that's a way that
not many teams in the league though can say they deserve to win every game but one.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe United, the first game, I would say that would be a stretch to say we deserve to win it.
No, but we had big chances to win.
Sure, but I think
I'm not saying
so did they.
I don't think it's necessarily a case of actually Fulham deserved to win every game. I think it's that Fulham had massive moments in every game that should have been taken under normal circumstances. United, we all know about the missed pass that basically was a one-on-one guaranteed and lots of other missed things. We talk about the Villa, the penalty, and City, the hat-trick of misses. There's been things in every single game where Fulham shoulda, coulda, got all 3 points, and that's incredibly impressive. And I just don't know if the rest of the league has necessarily noticed. I guess why would they? We don't take that stronger interest in Bournemouth.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's quite natural. It is interesting though that you bring that up because at that point, you were saying a minute ago, it's about crossing the I's and dotting the T's. That I think that, if we are saying that we have missed chances to go ahead in a variety of games, and they're not all just bad finishes, let's be clear. Some of them, as you say, are passes that went astray or decisions that went against us, wherever that happened to be.
And some of them have been things like conceding the Ings goal in the 94th minute and the Beto. So sometimes it's not just been going forward, it's been defensively. We've done something stupid at the death.
Agreed. But then is there a question, and I think most of those you would point to, and the big ones in particular, the City one, as you say, not taking chances, the Everton one now, not taking chances, even West Ham, it shouldn't have been a 1-goal margin, right? And you can look at the defence and say, well, you conceded a late goal, but we shouldn't have been in that position, given how good we were across the course of that game. So at that point, you said last year we were looking at this and thinking, do we have a fundamental problem scoring goals? I don't necessarily think we're quite at that stage yet, but there does come a point where you have to start thinking, okay, we think that Raul is playing really well, right? I don't think that anyone is going to sit here and tell you that Raul isn't having a good season leading the line for Fulham. He's been very, very good. And he has mostly been relatively clinical with the chances that have come his way. It's just that actually a lot of our chances don't fall to our centre forward. They fall to either midfielders coming through from deep or to the wingers. Now, we know Adama has not been able to finish for most of his career, and if he was, he wouldn't be playing for Fulham, etc., etc. But at some point, do you have to look at that and think, okay, do we need tweaks in the system in order to actually open up these opportunities for players that are going to score them, or for players in slightly better positions for them to be able to score? Something that slightly concerns me is that I haven't seen a repeating pattern of play that Fulham are scoring from. Now, it's not the be all and end all, and the fact that Fulham can be creative and make things work in the final third is a good thing. But I can't, it's not like we've scored a really similar type of goal again and again this season. And I think there should be something in Fulham's DNA that allows us to be able to carve out the same kind of chance, because that's the kind of thing you can then make repeatable.
Well, related to that, Fulham are the only team in the Premier League not to have scored a set piece this season. And is that maybe just that kind of like missing goal or two that could have made here like several points worth of difference to Fulham? Like,
is that the Palhinha effect?
Maybe, but I'm watching Arsenal most weeks, and look, I know that they're incredibly talented and they've got an amazing set piece coach that the camera pans to every time that Arsenal score a free kick.
Yeah,
it's kind of
I did enjoy that the weekend, because it panned him after that Declan Rice free kick. I was like, I'm not sure how much coaching has gone into Declan Rice just delivering a perfect delivery on the head of Mikel Merino.
You can see though the way they set up though, like the kind of
of course.
There's like Czechoslovakia 96 like formation, that's all of them bundled together and running in different directions. There's so much, they're causing chaos every time. And I do just think, like, is that just that little bit of difference that actually is what could have been Fulham up where Forest and Brighton are right now, and us in mid-table? Even a goal or two under the right circumstances, considering that we're doing a lot of the hard work. I mean, a lot of people will hear this and say, well, Andreas is the set piece taker.
Yeah, I mean, but Andreas was the set piece taker last year and we were fine from set pieces. So that hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Right.
So what's happened this season? I mean, yes, Palhinha maybe, but that can't be the only explanation.
Tosin, I think, potentially. There was a lot of that last season, and whilst Joachim Andersen is very good aerially, I think from what we've seen from him so far is that we've struggled to kind of get the ball to him and into those areas. And maybe that's just a lack of understanding at this point between our set piece techniques or our set piece practice, I suppose, and how new players are integrating into that system. I do think that there is probably something in that, Palhinha and Lukic played quite a lot towards the end of last season together. They're both aerial threats. They've both scored, in their careers from aerial situations. With Andreas dropping in there into that midfield too, and with Emil Smith-Rowe taking his spot, Emil Smith-Rowe doesn't feel like quite as much of an aerial threat. I think that Anderson doesn't feel quite as much of an aerial threat as Tosin did last season, or at least someone that people are going to crowd around because he's so incredibly tall, that lighthouse kind of figure. And so I wonder if there's just a little bit of that. There was also that kind of creativity, I suppose, with Willian last season, that some of them went short and were delivered from a different angle. That feels different, I think, this season so far. So maybe all of these things pan into each other. I imagine that it's something that Marco Silva is clearly aware of and will be working on. But it is, I think, a difference-making point that Fulham should be moving towards trying to fix.
Yeah, it feels like we keep trying the same, particularly corners. Feels like we keep going for the front post. I think we're looking for the flick, aren't we? We're looking to go to the front post.
We did this a lot in the Championship.
Yeah.
Kenny Tete coming across the front post and winning it and flicking it on.
With Southampton in first season back in the Prem as well, Palhinha's last minute goal was Kenny Tete's front post flick. Just maybe there could just be an element of randomness that we're not necessarily doing anything particularly wrong. It's just not dropped.
Yeah, and look,
Raul Jimenez should have scored one against Villa. He actually missed an incredibly easy header from a corner.
Yeah, also, I do think that you can... I've been defensive of Andreas, and I think that some of the criticism of him has been way over the top from, an all-round game perspective. Like, you can be angry at him taking a penalty off Raul and missing it, fine. Like, that's fine, and he shouldn't have done that. But equally, he was given... Well, I think that from my perspective, if you've got a player in form, like Raul was, who'd scored a penalty in international duty, comes back in there, I think at some point you have to look at that and be like, that's a man on fire. I've got to sacrifice myself
Marco's
here.
fault.
Okay, fine. But like the point being that I think at some point you've got to think team-wise ahead of yourself. And I think there is a moment with Andreas that the frustration of feeling like he's a flashpoint of criticism probably was like, well, I'll score a goal and that'll shut people up for a bit. And that is not a great place to be when you come into a penalty like that. It's also a terrible penalty, right? So that's fine. You can criticize that. You can criticize Andreas for not taking, but I think his all-round game hasn't dropped off all that much. He's doing slightly different things to what he was doing last season.
Villa.
He was bad against Villa, but I think that people's frustration with them thinking he's a 10 and then him playing deeper and him not doing the same things, and the frustrations with, I think, what people perceive his role to be compared to actually what he does, it makes these things overblown. And therefore he's getting these criticisms, and therefore he demands that he takes this penalty, right? And therefore he misses it, and there's up in arms. And yes, he was bad against Villa. He wasn't bad enough to get booed off.
No, of course, no one ever is unless you're Chris Martin.
But like, this is what I mean. No, Jazz Richards at Brentford away. But like, you do look at that and think, well, like, I can understand why there's frustration, but equally his deliveries, I think, from set pieces haven't been great this season. Now, I don't think we have loads of players who are particularly good at this. So I'm not going to sit here and say
Justice for Harrison Reed.
Harrison Reed, I think, cameo at the weekend was a good reason of why Harrison Reed will probably be leaving the club in the summer. But we can leave that there. A brilliant servant, time up, I think, at this point. But
Takes good set pieces.
The way that Andreas, takes set pieces hasn't been great this season. I don't think his deliveries have been perfect. And one of the things you can talk about with, you speak about Arsenal, and obviously it's different stratospheres, but it's one thing having excellent routines to move players around the way. It's another thing putting a delivery on a sixpence every time, as Bukayo Saka does from corners, as Declan Rice did at the weekend from free kicks. So those things are, a mark of very, very elite players. And it doesn't feel like we have one of those players who's able to swing that in. Andreas is good at it, but he's not elite at it. And this season, I think his level has dropped from good to pretty average. So that is a criticism that I'm willing to have and willing to take. But equally, I'm waiting for someone to show me a player in this team who's delivered better, because I wouldn't have a Adama Traore taking corners to begin with.
Does Smith Rowe not?
Never really did.
He feels like someone that could, that
should be able to, but actually he was often the player on the edge for moments like this. And I actually never really seen him take that many set pieces. It wasn't really a string that was on his bow. I'm sure that he could whip a ball in the same way that pretty much
and I feel like Iwobi,
Premier League footballers should be able to whip a ball in. But you want Iwobi in the box, right? You want Iwobi in the box. Iwobi is incredibly strong and one of those players who's able to recycle possession really well when it comes out as a second ball. So I don't think you want Iwobi taking the corner. So therefore, you're kind of left with this thing that until someone shows me someone better at taking set pieces, I'm not willing to accept that we should take Andreas off them, because I've seen him deliver good set pieces before.
No, it is a tough one. As you say, I'm not 100% sure that there's anyone there who, for me, cries out as a set piece. I always thought Tom Kearney was good, but he obviously isn't on the pitch very much. I'm trying to think who else could be. I mean, we don't know much about Reece Nelson.
Yeah, we don't know much about Reece Nelson, but Reece Nelson isn't starting games right now, so it's quite difficult to be like, yeah, Reece Nelson's our set piece taker.
Yeah, and maybe a
Harry Wilson's a pretty good set piece taker, but he's not on the pitch. Anyway,
quick mention for the under-21s. They got a little bit battered last night by Birmingham. Obviously, this is a first-team Birmingham wanting to go well in the. I don't know what's the sponsor. It's called the Football League Trophy, right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's always going to be the Papa John's to me. Actually, it wasn't that for a while. Was it the Autoglass Repair Trophy?
Oh, that's a long time. That's a long time ago.
Yeah. There's been quite a few. It's had some fun names. It's kind of. I think the traditional one. I think we'll go with the JPT. It was the Johnson's Paint Trophy.
That is the classic. Anyway, we lost 7-1. However,
Marshall Goddard scored a banger.
Come on, what a goal!
What a goal. Yeah, they took a bit of a pasting. Jay Stansfield scored after about 8 minutes. You're like, oh no, here we go. But Goddo scored a brilliant goal. We were very much in it, I thought, until about half time. And then it very much got away from us in the second
This
half.
is what is like. I think
It's
people.
fine. It's a great learning experience for those
What people
boys.
worried about when Premier League under-21s got accepted into this tournament, and for what it's worth, I still think that was a pretty cynical move from the football authorities to do that. But everyone was worried that you'd end up with an Everton under-21 versus Leicester under-21 final instead of what it should be, is like Doncaster Bradford or something like that.
Yeah.
And that hasn't happened. I don't think an under-21 team has reached a final, and I'm not even sure one's reached a semi-final, or if they have, not very many times. Like, generally you find that the professional League One, League Two teams do, with exception of a shock or two. I think we beat Shrewsbury, didn't we? But like, most of the time, the big teams get through against these under-21 sides.
You'd expect them to as well, but that's what it was supposed to be, right? I agree with you that it could have looked a little bit cynical, but generally I think this was supposed to allow under-21 teams to kind of experience that top-level football. And also, this is a massive opportunity for teams in League One and League Two to go and win a trophy at Wembley, right? And we saw that, anyone who's watched the Sunderland Till I Die documentary, the fact that they got to Wembley when they dropped down and they started again was such a massive deal to being like, hang on, we're still here. Like, we can still fill this out. We can still go and take over. Those things are, important, I think, in order to allow clubs to have that day in the sun. And it's one of those things that Fulham, because we were in that strange place between the Premier League and the Championship for such a long time, hadn't gone to Wembley for so long. And one of the reasons was we'd never really dropped down to League One, and therefore we couldn't get to the final.
Well,
of
and
this
our
trophy.
ascension from Division 2, Division 3, was so quick that we didn't really get that many years. We haven't been there for an awful
100%. And also
long time.
because there was pretty much something on the line every single year we went, it was 5 years that those three promotions happened. So because it was so quick and there was so much on the line every time, then those kind of extra competitions fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in our cup runs during promotion or relegation battles. They are surplus to requirement. So yeah, anyway, the point being that it would have been a learning curve. I think in some ways it's a very good thing for these under-21 players. And Marshall Goddo looked really, really good, held his own. And I think that the future remains very bright for him.
Yeah, exactly. Right, we'll take a break there. Afterwards, we'll look ahead to Monday's derby against Brentford. This episode of Fulhamish is brought to you by NordVPN. NordVPN is a way of watching sporting matches from all around the world just by changing the location on your tablet, your laptop, or your phone. For instance, you can use NordVPN to watch football matches for a fraction of the cost, including those 3 p.m. fixtures that aren't available here in the UK. Plus, you can use NordVPN on up to 10 devices. So, for instance, if my dad goes on holiday to Spain, he can log in using my account, and then he can watch Match of the Day to catch up on those Fulham highlights. Only when Fulham win, of course. Right now, you can get a great deal by signing up for NordVPN at nordvpn.com/Fulhamish. Not only will you get a great rate, but you'll get 4 months extra as well. Plus, it's completely risk-free thanks to NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. So to get that great rate plus 4 extra months, go to nordvpn.com/Fulhamish. That's nordvpn.com/Fulhamish. Part 2 of the Fulhamish podcast. Sammy here on the Thursday Club with Jack. If you're heading to the Brentford game, make sure you pop into Craft Beer Co., a beautiful pub located at Hammersmith Broadway with their exceptional selection of independently sourced craft beers. Hammersmith Broadway, pre or post match, they will be open. The perfect place for a pre or post match pint. Jack, let's get into Brentford then. On the Monday night football, the West London derby. Always got trepidation ahead of this one. Always just feel like a lot is on the line. We've been here before. Mm-hmm. We know what it's like to taste defeat and how painful it can be. We also know how amazing it is to win one of these games. How do you see this one going?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of chat about this being moved to Monday night, and I know there's some frustrations around with it being a derby and, the excitement being a little bit tempered by that. Obviously, I remember going to the G-Tech on a Monday night where we lost 3-2 in that first season back up, and it was a little bit of a strange atmosphere. Didn't feel quite as electric, but I suppose these games under the lights can provide something different. I mean, I think it would have been ideal if it was on a Friday night. This would have been a great kind of opener to the weekend.
Yeah, that would have been nice.
And you kind of get on with it after that. But it's going to be an interesting one. I don't think that there's much between these two teams. I think it's been a bit of a weird start from a Brentford perspective. They've been unbeaten at home, lost every game away. Their away games have been really tricky. Their home games have been relatively easy. So it's quite hard to gauge exactly where they are. They've had some good performances. They've had some less good performances. I thought they were pretty good against City. They were pretty weirdly bad against Manchester United, I thought. But they've had some really odd moments this season. Now, everyone was talking about the fact that they scored for 3 games in a row within the first 60 seconds, 4 games in a row within the first 2 minutes, although that has thankfully slowed down a touch of late. And I think you kind of come to where they are. I think they've done a good job, as much as I hate to say that, in turning things around after losing their main striker in Ivan Toney and then losing his replacement in Igor Thiago, who was supposed to be the guy that came in and led the line. They haven't seemed to have too many problems scoring goals. They've found a way. Brian Mbeumo's been in good form. Visa's back now as well on top of that. So they've been impressive in the way that they've shifted players around. I've been really, really impressed with Mikael Damsgaard this season. He took a long, long time to get going. He signed for Brentford after that excellent summer he had with Denmark at the Euros, and everyone was very excited about him. And he then basically didn't play for like a year and a half. He's dropped into a slightly deeper role. He works incredibly hard in the midfield, but has had a very good start to this season. Keane Lewis-Potter has started to show glimpses of why he's so highly rated. There's a lot of very talented footballers in this Brentford side, but I did watch them last night against Sheffield Wednesday in the Cup, and they were absolutely dreadful in the second half. Dreadful. And it was a rotated team, but still a team you would be expecting to quite comfortably knock out a side who are languishing towards the bottom of the championship. Schade played, Mbeumo played, Lewis Potter played, Matthias Jensen played, Nathan Collins played, Ben Mee played, and Mark Flecken played. So they only changed really the fullbacks and a couple of players in the midfield. Fabio Carvalho started. But you kind of look at that and you think, well, why were they so poor? And honestly, I couldn't put a finger on it. They just didn't seem to be at the races. And maybe that's having a game at the weekend and then a game a couple of days later, not having loads of rest. And they'll obviously have a fair more amount of rest when they are coming towards into this game. But I did think it was interesting. They just looked a bit shattered. It took penalties to get them through that game. And in the second half, they really failed to create anything. Obviously, the game against Ipswich at the weekend was quite emotionally turbulent, should we say. That they went 2-0 down, pulled it back to 2-2, went 3-2 up, got pegged back to 3-3. Ipswich thought they'd nick the point, and then they score a 96-minute winner. So it was all a bit like, whoa, that was a lot.
Oh, it was an epic game of football.
And you do sometimes, I think, after those kind of games, just have a little bit of a lull in the one after them. And so I actually do think they'll probably be quite glad they got a Carabao Cup game in the midst of the derby and actually what happened last weekend. Look, I think we can take advantage of the fact that they haven't looked brilliant defensively. I don't think they've kept a clean sheet in the Premier League this season. So you look at that and you think, well, Fulham are creating the amount of chances that we have done in recent games and they look this leaky at the back. Are we going to be able to, cut them open? And I think the answer is probably yes. Equally, they have looked quite potent in attack. So part of me thinks this is a high scorer. Thankfully, the last high scorer at the Cottage we had with Brentford, we ended up 3-2 victors. So that's a good thing. I do think it's going to be interesting, but there's not loads between these two teams, as you can probably see from the league table. There's a point between us, a place between us. The goal difference is very, very similar. So a lot on the line, but I think with home advantage, I'm feeling more comfortable and confident about it than I have done in years gone by.
I think the thing to give, and this is the limit of how much credit I'll give to Brentford, but they have done well in the past year to overcome quite a bit of adversity. Mm-hmm. It almost feels like I can't imagine Fulham dealing with the injuries, suspensions that they've had. Like Rico Henry is such a massive loss.
Yeah, and they don't have another natural left back. So Sepp Vandenberg's done a bit there. They've had Mads Roslov playing a little bit there. They haven't had a natural left back replacement for Rico Henry, and he's been out for so long at this point.
If you took out Robinson from our team, and then you took out our 2 strikers, and the midfield injury, they've had injuries everywhere almost. I think and Mbeumo and Visa feel like the only players that
even Visa's had an injury recently, but I think they've been the most consistent in terms of what they've been doing.
if you did that to Fulham, we would really find that tough. And so you got to give it to them. They were always going to be, I thought, a team that stayed up in the Premier League for a season or two, because I think they had such momentum with them, and they were always quite well drilled under Thomas Frank. But they
signed really well.
Yeah, but I always thought that it would fall away a bit. I always thought that the magic would wear off. You can't keep pulling rabbits out of a hat in terms of transfers. Eventually, kind of their size and their resources and everything else will come home to roost, and it hasn't yet. And I thought that this season it might do.
Oh, they look fine.
And okay, you could potentially put an argument together that they've had an incredibly kind run of home fixtures.
Yeah,
but they've still gone and won all of them. Probably they're in a position now where they just need to kind of keep it fairly average for the rest of the season, and they're not going to get dragged into that relegation scrap now.
I mean, they're alongside us in the table. I think if we cannot make that argument for ourselves, we can make that argument for them, right?
Yeah.
We can say that if Fulham are pretty average from now to the end of the season, we'll be fine. And I think that's true. I think we've already amassed enough in terms of momentum and gap. That
you could argue that they've probably had the 5 easiest games of the season, probably they've had nearly all of them now.
Yeah, okay, fine. But
then
equally, they've probably had the 4 hardest as well. So, that kind of thing balances out. Yes, obviously, you're more likely to get points at home, and therefore the easier games at home are something you should look towards. But you can balance that conversation out. I don't.
But they've maximised it, so that conversation's not there.
Yeah.
I think if they'd have lost a couple and won 3, then I'd be like, oh, you haven't really made as much of those easy games as you could have. When you got pretty much 100%, then you can't really argue. I mean, there has been a lot of high scoring affairs. They have lost all of their away matches, but you've got to say that really on paper, this is the first winnable home game for them. Although away game. I mean, you could argue that Man United under Erik ten Hag at all points is a winnable game, and they didn't do particularly well there. From a Fulham perspective then, any changes? We had a large discussion on Sunday's podcast about Reece Nelson and whether he should come into the side. He's looked really impressive. I will once again, and I feel like I do this every single Thursday club, sit here and go, maybe, but it's a good idea, but I don't think Marco will do it.
I think the only player you could bring Reece Nelson in for is Emil Smith-Rowe.
Not Adama Traore.
Well, I suppose. You could go a straight swap and put a Werby on the right. Yeah, I mean, I guess. The thing is that they've been quite open in transition, and Adama Traore is Fulham's biggest transitional threat. As much as he hasn't put the finishing touches on goals and hasn't managed to bag a whole load, he still remains an incredibly difficult player for defences to mark, and he causes nightmares for everybody else. And even in that Everton game where he wasn't at his best, I don't think by any stretch of the imagination, he still is the person who manages to eke out a couple of chances. And look, if a couple of those bounce differently, he puts in a great cross, obviously, at one point for Iwobi, who knocks it over the bar. There's a couple of moments where you're like, that's actually just very good. And if other players had come in for you there, then you're still just a nightmare for any defender to come up against. And I think especially given that we've just talked about Brentford's problems at left back and the fact that Rico Henry hasn't had a natural successor or replacement, you're kind of looking at that and thinking, well, Adama could have a field day there. Adama running in behind a Sepp van den Berg, who is a centre-back by trade, or a Mads Roerslev, who has good games and bad games. You're looking at that and thinking, yeah, I probably want that. So the only thing I would say you could do is shift Iwobi inside, go with Nelson down one flank and Adama down the other, which obviously makes Fulham quite open in terms of the way that we were going to play. But if we are going to try and win a gunfight, it's not the worst idea I've ever heard.
Yeah.
I agree with Jack on this, and I think Adama is... Oh, it's Elizabeth, by the way. I think Adama is essential to playing this game because, especially in this derby, the way we want to win is spectacularly. And I don't want to have our most exciting player sat on the bench. I want to do something that really humiliates them.
I want to win in any way possible. Let me just be clear. I don't care if it is off Kevin McDonald's bum. Like the ball dropping in off a corner. Like any win will do me nicely. Thank you very much.
Oh, completely. I do think that there is a potential that this is the match where Fulham, but then Brentford are always so up for this. This is...
Yeah.
And it's
as they should be, right? Like this is one of those weird things. Like, of course, Brentford should be up for it, and Fulham should be up for it. Like, this is a local derby, and as much as in years gone by, you can point to this and say this game didn't matter to Fulham. Where it does now, and that narrative that like these two teams don't care about each other is nonsense. Like it's pure nonsense at this point. We've had nearly a decade of this game being one of the most important games in our season, in whichever division we were in. Like, we need to get past this idea. Like, this is a huge game for Fulham, and it matters loads, and we need to win it.
Yeah, I fully agree. I've been on the, I think at first when we went down in 2014 and 15, it was a little bit like, I don't think we knew what Brentford were going to become then. It was a bit of almost like, it felt like a quirk of the fixture calendar.
Yeah.
Wow, we're at the same tier as Brentford. Oh, that's cute.
That's fine. But also, like, I think it's one of those things that people who went in the 80s will obviously tell you different. But from our generation growing up, Brentford never figured on our radar. Like, I played for Brentford's youth sites. Like, and I went alongside my aunt for years. And when Fulham were away, when I was really small, and she'd just be like, cool, come with me. And I'd be like, grand. I never heard a single song about Fulham. Like, and it was only when they started moving up the leagues and you got to that playoff final against Yeovil and you're like walking down Wembley Way and they're singing about Fulham. I was like, are they doing that? Like, oh. What do you mean you hate Fulham? I was like, we've never sang a song about Brentford in my entire life. Like, we sing about QPR and we sing about Chelsea. So for us of a certain age, like, there is that element of it wasn't a thing. When we went back down that first time, they were so hyped about it. They were like, we're up with Fulham. We hate Fulham. We were like, what? What are you on about? But I think that to this point, to kind of deny that any longer is just wild at this point. They are now, and at this point in the kind of diamond, if you will, of West London football clubs, it used to be QPR alongside Fulham with Brentford at the base of it. That has swapped. It is Chelsea there, and then Fulham and Brentford below them, obviously trying to challenge upwards, being upwardly mobile. And QPR are forgotten, right? QPR are the forgotten man of West London football at this point. So the idea that, we are battling with Brentford to be that kind of second in the ascendancy, if you will. And obviously there was that seasons where Chelsea were bad and fine, whatever. But in real terms, Chelsea are going to go back to the top because they have inordinate amounts of money and that's how it works. But you get to this point and you're like, well, this is so important then. And these bragging rights matter. I mean, maybe it matters more to me because I live in Ealing, right? And like, obviously it's a bit of a split loyalties. There's Brentford everywhere. There's Fulham quite a lot. There's a fair bit of QPR. The QPR one, you can just be like, all right, mate, out of the way. But Brentford have had a lot to shout about in recent years. And so this matters loads. And I'm really, really nervous, but hyped and also excited about this game.
Yeah, I agree. I think to deny it anymore is a little bit pointless. I think this has been the most real that a West London derby has ever been.
No, we had a good ding dong with QPR for a while.
Not this long.
No, not for this length of time. You're right.
Like, there was a couple of seasons where QPR came up and we had some good... And also, Fulham always bloody won it. I think it was the one game that QPR won that I can remember, the Trapped pretty good performance and the Trivella goal. Less spoken about that, the better. But yeah, I think this has been the most consistently level, even West London derby.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I would argue that they've probably had the better of it. But we've had the better of the bigger games, obviously, in that moment. But like, generally, there was a period where we were like, are we ever going to beat this lot? Yeah. Like, they're so loud. Can we shut them up? And then Tom Kenny won at Griffin Park, and that was great. And you get the big ones, obviously, and you get the playoff final and then the first game back in the Premier League. Those things all matter. But over the course of it, I mean, I haven't got the 11 versus 11 up here, but I'd be surprised if we won more than 30% of the last 10 years.
They have the better record in total. And there'll be a couple of Brentford fans watching this. I feel like we've said this before, but can we get it out there? I still find the Brentford, you gave us the best thing was by beating us at Wembley. Can we put this narrative to one side? Because this is absolutely nonsense. And
of course,
you might come in with the devil's advocate here.
I'm not going to play devil's avocado, but I do appreciate that you kind of they can think about that, and in the same way that Villa think about us beating them at Wembley, right?
That's different, though.
Is it?
I think it is. The difference with the Brentford Fulham thing is I get the logic of actually probably getting promotion that year would have been too early and would have been a rubbish experience for them to get promoted to the Premier League when there was no fans. That would have been I understand.
Yeah, in the same way that it didn't really matter to us because we've been there, done it before, right?
Yeah, I understand that logic. What I think that, like, from what I see online, that Brentford fans do not understand is how much they would have lived on that game and dined out on it if they had won forever.
Yeah. I completely agree.
We would never have heard the end
It
of it.
wouldn't have mattered if they'd got relegated the next year and we'd gone up.
Yeah.
Because it would have been different, for example, but also like they would have still been like, we beat you in the biggest game that mattered to us ever. And that would have been true. But at the time, obviously that's changed now. That is no longer, I think, obviously they went and won against Swansea the year after and fair play, they deserved to go up that year.
But it was the biggest Fulham Brentford match.
100%.
And they would have lived on it and died. I mean, I guess we still kind of
and we do, right? Like, and that's fine because
but not
it
to
mattered.
the same extent. There would be a statue of whoever scored that.
To be fair, I've been
Brentford
banging
goal.
on about them building a statue of Joe Bryan for ages, so I'm not gonna pull it.
But there would already be one commissioned and made and in bronze outside that G-Tech Community Stadium, and that's what I like try and get across whenever I have this argument with the Brentford fan. It's like, I get it, I understand your logic, but you haven't quite thought about it from the other way around. That if you had won, and what Fulham did that day was avoid a lifetime of them. There would have been no
step around the banana skin. Absolutely.
We would every match that would have come up, we'd have beaten them.
There'd be a massive flag in the away end.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, there was a flag in the away end about Jota scoring it in the last minute at the Cottage in a league game. It didn't matter. Like, so imagine what the flags would be like if this had been the other way around. I get it. But I can take their point that actually in the long term, that ultimately has helped them grow into the place where they are now. And that's fine. That's a reasonable argument. But I think you're right from an emotional perspective. We would have never, ever heard the end of it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Also on that, like, they came up through the playoffs when they came up the year after. It was a 1 in 4 chance that they got promoted effectively that year once they were in the playoffs. It wasn't like they went on to storm the league after we beat them.
No, but they were much better that year, I thought. Generally, they were unlucky not to be in that automatic conversation, and they were so clearly the best side in the playoffs, I think. From
They should have got automatic. They absolutely bottled it, didn't they? They bottled automatic promotion. They lost a couple of big games. I think I remember that playoff campaign and like was desperately did not want them to win that playoffs for obvious reasons.
Well, that was the worst day ever because we'd been relegated already. They won the playoffs and then Chelsea won the Champions League on the same Saturday.
Yes,
it was like you
weren't on a stag do with a Chelsea and a Brentford fan.
It was amongst the worst days of my life. No, I was sat in Hamwell with my brother and we watched him win the playoff game and I was like, this is gonna be a really bad day, isn't it? He was like, yeah, this is going to be a really bad day. And I was like, okay, cool.
I never forget, and it is still one of the most painful phone calls. Someone calling me the next day from 5 Live asking, they said, hi, Sammy, we wondered if you fancied coming on Adrian Charles's show to discuss how Fulham had the worst day ever on Saturday, where you got relegated, Brentford got promoted, and Chelsea won the Champions League.
I think we'd already been relegated.
We had been relegated, but it would only been like a week or so.
Oh, yeah.
A week or two. And that happened. I just remember like,
no,
it's a nice invite.
I'm gonna leave it.
Yeah,
I remember Sammy teed it up like a month or two before, as in like this could be a possibility that happened, that Fulham go down the same week as Brentford, go up, and Chelsea win the Champions League, and we were like, ha 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 ha, and then it happened. It was the worst thing ever.
I think I knew about it from a long way out because I knew the stag do I was on, and I knew the company that it was utterly the stag was a Chelsea fan. And then he had a couple of mates on it that were Brentford fans.
Actually, I'm on a stag this weekend with a stag who's a Chelsea fan and his cousins who are Brentford fans. And they were like, should we just roll straight into Monday? I was like, yeah, all right, maybe. We'll see how we go.
You've done quite well there that we got moved to Monday night.
Thank God. Like, it has really been. Although, to be fair, like, what's the flip? We win and you get to brag. It means that I can go to the game, which is obviously a massive one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting weekend. I imagine there's not going to be much peace between myself and my friend's cousin.
Yeah, I enjoy. I would find it really funny if Brentford went down. It would be really funny, but at the same time,
yeah, I mean, it's also incredibly wishful thinking at this point.
No, they're not going to. But it's good to have a proper derby.
Yeah, it is. It's really good to have a rival that cares about you.
Yeah.
Like, and that's important, right? Like, this is what they drive things on. These are what the games that football's supposed to be about. Like, genuine two teams that are desperate to beat each other, that don't like each other, that want to get each other. Like, it's one thing us shouting at Chelsea fans. It's another one of them just sort of shrugging and be like, we honestly don't care. We kind of hope you do well. Like, it's frustrating and patronising and all of the above. And look, it's fine. Like, you have to deal with it. But it is great to have a rival in Brentford that you actually can get, your teeth stuck into it. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to sit down afterwards with my aunt, who's a Brentford fan, and have a pint and chat about it. But I'm still desperate to win this game.
Yeah. Some emails then. Liz, you'll particularly like this first one because it's something that we referenced on last week's podcast from James Marriott. Says, long-time listener, ... Dear Sammy and Jack and Peter and George and Elizabeth and Drew and Sarah and all the other excellent hosts, of which there are too many to name, but we all know who you are. Driving home from Suva, in brackets, the Fijian capital city with a population of approximately 250,000 the other night, I nearly drove off the road when you put out the shout, are there any Fulham fans in Fiji? The answer is most definitely yes, but with a strong response that there are not that many.
Oh my goodness. That's the best email we've ever received.
This is wild.
Yeah. So then we also talked about timings and stuff. If you live in Fiji of Fulham matches. James said, by the way, for us in Fiji, New Zealand and Australia, we are approximately 12 hours ahead of you. So a 3 p.m. Saturday kickoff for you is 3 a.m. Sunday morning kickoff for us. That means there is some serious commitment on display from down under. We love a 7:30 p.m. kickoff, 7:30 in the morning for us. As painful as the Preston game was, we were watching. Mind you, to even things out, we were also watching the Everton penalty shootout as well at 10 in the morning. I'm a Kiwi living and working in Fiji. I started as a Fulham fan in 2004 when I moved to Singapore for work. In Southeast Asia, no one knows who the All Blacks are, but the Premier League dominates the sporting landscape. Playing rugby all my life, I had no EPL team, but I quickly had to adopt one. With Simon Elliott being in the 2004 team, the New Zealand
This
team...
might be the best thing that Simon Elliott ever did for the club.
Yeah, the New Zealand team being called the All Whites, and a couple of times flying over Craven Cottage on the way to Heathrow. It was Fulham for me. So many memories and so much more heartache, but I wouldn't want to support another team. Love the club, love the podcast. Many thanks to all the Fulhamish team. Always available to come on the show and give a global perspective from Jamie in Fiji.
That's amazing.
He then says, oh, and Jack, I am a Jets fan as well, but that is too painful to bring up. So
Let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about the Jets.
Amazing.
That's incredible.
So we do have a Fulhamish listener and a Fulham fan in Fiji.
Bosh.
That's insane.
Shouts out to Jamie.
I need to go through our stats on our little our podcast upload platform and find the 0.0001% that's from Fiji, and I'll know it's him.
Yeah, I have done this in the past, and I've gone round random because it's pretty much every country has listened to one at some point over the 8 years we've been doing this. I think North Korea might be the one where
but there might be. We just might not. The data might not come out.
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, I think they're pretty hot on that.
Yeah. Any other extremely niche countries? Please do email us. hello@fulhamish.co.uk. That could be maybe something over the next few weeks.
Yeah, 100%.
We really want to hear about how it impacts your routine as well.
Yes.
I want to hear what time you're waking up, what you're doing while you're doing that. If it's a 10:30 a.m. penalty shootout for you, are you working from home with the TV open?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Maybe you've got one of those time zones that's not on the hour. I think it's maybe
There's only a few, but you are right.
there are some that are it's 7 3/4 hours. I think there's a part of India that I'm pretty sure is on the half hour. I'm pretty sure there's somewhere in the world that's got 3/4 of an hour. That must be really annoying to try and work out the bloody kickoffs.
Do you know what was really weird? Actually, one of the things that just talking about time zones. I obviously travelled from Spain to Portugal. Spain is an hour ahead. Portugal is not.
Right.
Because Lisbon is on the same
Yeah.
line as London. But we were actually going east. Yeah, we were going east, more towards the time zone, and we came back an hour. It was really odd because we were going south, but obviously the train turns east
I
across the
see.
border. And I was like, we've just gone back an hour while going further away. That's really bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah, really weird one. Anyway.
This one from Right, Andrew James says, agree with your analysis of many respects of the Everton game, but 2 points if I may. You do not mention the fact that we should have scored at least 2 or 3 goals at Goodison. 1 goal is rarely enough at this level, and converting and spurning chances is becoming an issue. See West Ham, Aston Villa and Manchester City. So why we clearly need still at the back, we also need to convert our chances at the top of the pitch. I mean, we'll go on to point 1. There is a point here, Jack, that we often are scoring 1 goal a game, and it's clearly not enough.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, look, we talked about this at the top, right? That actually we created a load of chances and there is a question mark about our ability to finish them. Now, whether that's what we're creating the wrong type of chances and they're falling in difficult positions, or we are just unable to finish our dinner at the moment and it's something that's affecting the whole team, not just as we said, it's not Raul who's missing loads of chances, it's other players in his team. So are we getting the chances to the wrong players? Are we opening up the wrong avenues of opportunity? I'm not 100% sure what it is, but Fulham do need to sort it out and pretty quickly.
Then Andrew also asks, the international break has a particularly disruptive influence on smaller clubs like ours in comparison to state-owned clubs like Manchester City. Players return from international duty exhausted or injured, brackets Lukic and or AFCON duties, Bassi and Iwobi, who are unavailable for last season's Carabao Cup semi-final. My dad mentioned this actually, that was it something that we overlooked slightly from the Villa game? We had obviously 2 players in Jimenez and Robinson who played effectively Wednesday evening on a different continent. I think there probably is a safe argument that whilst obviously the big clubs have an awful lot of players go away for international duty, the size of our squads mean that for actually clubs of Fulham stature, those absences where players go abroad are probably more keenly felt.
Yeah, we're probably in that really dark sort of middle zone because obviously you have more players going away at the top clubs, but there is more depth to kind of counteract it. Whereas we're in that place where, 50-60% of our squad probably goes away on international duty, and yet there's less players. But further down the food chain, 2 or 3 players go away on international duty, and it's less of a concern, right? So we're probably in that middle area, which is a bit difficult. It just kind of is what it is. This isn't going to change anytime soon. We have to deal with it. You have to be able to affect. But also, I do think that Marco maybe should think about that a little bit more. You saw Arne Slot, right? He did this with the Liverpool team. The loss to Nottingham Forest that they had included him playing Alexis McAllister and Luis Diaz, both after they'd come back from international duty, playing for their countries in World Cup qualifiers, not just friendlies, in CONMEBOL. And they both were pretty poor that day. I thought it was very interesting that neither of them started for him this time after the international break. Both of them were left on the bench, and he was able to rotate. Now, it's a luxury that he has, that he can bring in, a variety of players like Curtis Jones and Cody Hackbo to replace them, that Fulham don't have. But I do wonder if there is a space there that Marco has to think about that and think, okay, obviously Robinson and Jimenez in particular had long journeys, didn't come back. I think it was later than that. I think it was actually Thursday morning by the time that...
Pereira also had played in Brazil and came back, and I don't think it's any coincidence that he had such a bad game against Villa.
Yeah. So maybe there is something on the manager then, and much as the international break affects us maybe a bit more than other teams, fine, I can accept that, but it's not going to change. So you have to do what you can to counteract that, and maybe that means rotating the squad more after international breaks and utilising the squad that you've built. I don't know exactly how that looks yet, but I think we said before that game against Villa, I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if Castagna plays at left back, because Robinson's been away, and we're like, well, he won't drop Robinson, but maybe he should have. Yeah. Maybe he should have given him a rest. And look, Sasha Lukic injury is unfortunate, but it is also unfortunate. There's not much about it that you can kind of. He will want to play for his country. Players should all want to play for their countries. It frustrates me immensely when players like Kylian Mbappe decide they're not going to play for their country despite being captains, because they've just decided that they're putting their club team first. Like, international football
that's worked out really well for him.
Yeah, I mean, Muppet. But you're kind of looking at that and thinking, you're captain of your country. The least you can do is turn up. International football should be a pinnacle and an absolute privilege to go and do. And I refuse, I don't think Fulham should ever be like, no, you shouldn't go and play. But I was talking about this about Martin Odegaard for Arsenal the other day, because I was like, Arteta was like, he might be back before the international break. I was like, do you want him to be back before the international break?
Yeah.
Because he plays that last game before it. He's Norway captain. He's going to go to Norway's camp. So maybe you don't play him in that game.
I think you can put a bit of pressure on, though. And particularly, I think in the case of Robinson, you saw that Pochettino was kind of like made-ish to drop some players for that Mexico game. Now, I think you can make an argument that Christian Pulisic playing in the Champions League is playing much more football than Anthony Robinson.
Yeah.
But and I think they're
I think
upcoming
that was it. I think it was the players really with European commitments that were let
but
go.
like,
really.
you know, like putting a bit of pressure on, say like he's first team, so you know he can play one game and he can play, but it's tough. This one from Daniel Mattock says, "Hello lads, long time listener, first time emailer. Only kidding. But question for you: where do you see us strengthening in January to solidify top 10 and maybe push for Europe? I think a Muniz loan may be good while Raul plays this way, and getting in a striker, maybe also a proper number 6. Love the pod." From Dan.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure how Fulham are going to play January, because I still think there is an element that Fulham wanted another striker in the summer if Jay Stansfield was going to go. Now, they eventually brought in a winger in Reece Nelson, who has looked good so far, so good, I think, in a Fulham shirt. But maybe they will want a third option in there. It is difficult because I don't think there's loads between Muniz and Raul, and I think that both of them are kind of form players. So if Fulham are going to go and buy a striker, it kind of feels like it has to be someone who's going to come in as the guy, and that's that's a pretty big statement for your two players that are already on the books, and especially for Muniz after he was given the number 9 shirt and kind of given the faith of the club to carry on. So there's a big decision to make there in terms of what that looks like, because I think sending him out on loan again would be pretty rogue, considering how he performed in the back half of last season. And you know what will happen: if Fulham bring in a striker and they don't perform and Muniz is on loan, then people are going to be absolutely screaming at the club of why they did that when they had a player already in the ranks. So that's a tricky one, and I think that it's going to be interesting to see what they do in that situation. I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple leave, maybe on loan, and maybe like your Harry Wilsons, if they aren't getting first team football, maybe a Harrison Reed. Maybe they go out on loan, maybe they actually a decision, a top end championship, to basically be like, oh, can we go and play football week in, week out?
Don't know why, but something like Harry Wilson to Leeds feels like something that would just happen if they were like kind of on the cusp of promotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know what that look. I'm not saying those things should happen, but equally you can understand for those players who, have been part of squads and been much more used in years gone by. And look, maybe Harrison actually gets a run more into the team now that Sasha's out, and what that looks like in the future, I don't know. But if there are players who are not getting minutes and feel like they still have lots of their careers left to kind of push on with, you can see them being like, can I have a go, please? Like, can I go somewhere to try and prove my worth, or, bump me up for a move in the summer? So I think it's gonna be interesting to see who leaves before who comes in. I still think we're a midfielder short. And I said this in the summer, I thought we needed 2 players to cover that Paulinho void. We ended up with 1. I think that Fulham might move for a kind of more traditional lighthousey kind of number 6, seeing as Sander Berge hasn't really excelled in that skill set so far. But I think it's going to depend on who goes out before we bring anyone in.
It's a bit early as well, isn't it? We don't really fully know the problems that we need to solve in that transfer window.
I know lots of problems that we need to solve, but I don't know how you solve them.
Well, also, I think a lot can change between now and kind of end December, when I think we'll know a little bit more about what Fulham need in the window. Finally, this is the ding-dong that we've been waiting for from last week. Brian Chapman, he sent us this email, which I read on last week's Thursday Club, but it's only right to give the actual recipient of the email the message. Brian says, "Hi team, a couple of weeks ago, Jack read out my email about Andreas Pereira. After the performance on Saturday against Villa, all I can say is, Jack, what would it take?" From Brian.
Yeah, I mean, look, I spoke about Andreas earlier, and I think, again, you can be critical of individual performances, and you can be very critical of that performance. I thought it was good against Everton. I thought it was excellent in the middle. I thought he was industrious. I thought his passing was excellent. I thought he made us tick. And as you've just pointed out, he came back from international duty that week. I don't think it's a problem to say that a player had a diabolical performance, and that was the case with Andreas at Villa. It was a really bad performance, and it wouldn't have surprised me if he had been dropped for the Everton game off the back of that Villa performance. However, Marco trusts him. He's an on-field leader. He's a player who clearly has the faith of his manager and is someone that the manager sees as an integral part of the unit that Fulham are on the pitch. I think that's I don't think it's a surprise that Fulham were dreadful against Villa on the back of a performance that Andreas was dreadful. I think the days where Fulham are best are the days where Andreas makes things tick in the middle. And so there are two sides to that coin that you can say, yes, he had a really, really bad performance against Villa. You'd be like, well, everyone else then fell off. A rising tide lifts all boats, right? And I think that Andreas is the tide with Fulham. I think that when he performs, Fulham perform. And there are exceptions to this rule. I'm not saying that he's played well every time Fulham have played well, or that every time he's played well, Fulham have also raised their level. But I think generally as a rule, it's a good place to be. Because when you see Andreas in his flow, directing traffic in the midfield, making things tick, knitting things together, and getting around the pitch to an extent that nobody else does. I really do believe this. I think his work rate and his industry is so crucial to what Marco's trying to achieve. At some point, you have to go, well, you can like or dislike Andreas. That's fine. You have that decision to make yourself. But ultimately, do you trust Marco Silva? Because if you trust Marco Silva and Marco Silva trusts Andreas, then you either, you fall on one side of the fence. I think that what he does badly is amplified 10 times more than everything he does good. And at this point, there is this level of agenda that we have towards Andreas. That doesn't mean that he can't be criticised. He can, and I have done, right, in this podcast. But I do think that everything he does that's even remotely bad is amplified 10 times more than all of the good things he does on the pitch. And because quite a lot of the good things he does is like off-ball work, is making up spaces, is shifting formations in order to put Fulham into sensible blocks, all of those things matter. And because they're stuff that doesn't get headlines, they're not assists, they're not goals, their misplaced passes are picked out far more than the fact that he's rotated the ball 6 times and pushed Fulham from wing to wing in the same move. So I take it, and I'm absolutely fine with Brian saying that was a bad performance, because it was. He was dreadful against Aston Villa. But I think that ultimately he is so crucial to what Marco's trying to do that if you trust Marco Silva, you have to accept that Andreas is going to be on the pitch.
Wow. I got kind of emotional listening to that. It was like a battle cry for Andreas there. One question before we go. Liz, I'd like your thoughts on this as well. Can we think of a player who splits opinion? I think Andreas may be one of the biggest opinion splitters since Bobby Zamora.
Oh, nice. I like that.
I'm genuinely struggling to think of someone. Parker?
Simon Davis had his detractors.
Early doors, but obviously in the end.
Yeah, but I mean, by the end, Zamora didn't really have his detractors.
Yeah.
Like Simon Davis was I tell you who it is. It's Jamie O'Hara.
Yes. Jamie O'Hara's a great shout.
Jamie O'Hara was dreadful. Jamie O'Hara was so bad for Fulham. And he scored a few goals and everyone got really excited about him. He was awful. I'd say there's a couple in that era. Ryan Tunnicliffe was a wonderful footballer. Brilliant footballer. Fulham were always better when Ryan Tunnicliffe was on the park in that era. He wouldn't have been playing for Fulham in the Premier League, let's be clear. But
yeah.
Of his kind of era, I loved Ryan Tunnicliffe. I thought he brought so much to the party.
David Button.
Gianluigi Buffon.
David Button was, because there was a point where
David Button was another one where even if he did things right, he couldn't do anything right.
He was making clear mistakes, but a lot of the chat was he's good with his feet and all of this, which I think is similar to Andreas in that you could see the mistakes quite clearly. You weren't 100% sure what the benefit was.
David Button wasn't the problem was David Button came in. He wasn't as bad as people made him out to be, but he also wasn't good.
Yeah,
that's the problem with Button. There was no point where you were like, "Oh, Button's been excellent today." But he wasn't very good. And also, the players around him weren't loads better. And it was this idea that everyone else was much better than him. I just don't think that's the case. But that doesn't make him a good footballer, I don't think.
If you can think of any more kind of opinion
Gabor
splitters.
Karai.
Well, that's not an opinion splitter, is it? I think everyone had the same opinion there.
Tosin a little bit. Diop.
Yeah, I feel there are quite a few from that 2021 season when we were terrible under Parker. In the Premier League, that I feel people like Ademola Lookman.
Anguissa. Ademola Lookman just came 13th in the Ballon d'Or.
I mean, Ademola Lookman scored a hat-trick in the Europa League final. There are levels.
Anguissa is
a good
one, but I think Anguissa never had enough of a run in the side like Andreas has.
Maybe.
And that's
Gieser
why,
was-
and that's
Gieser
why
was
he
class.
feels a bit Bobby Zamora, because like Hodgson had that ultimate faith in Zamora, even though like I think that first season the fan base couldn't understand why he was playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you remember when, I think it's difficult, it depends really what you're asking, but when Scott Parker was playing Ivan Cavallero every week, and
Cavallero's a
most
good
of the
one.
fan base
Cavallero
were
is a
thinking,
good one.
What are you doing? Especially because obviously like the context of it was Mitrovic was on the bench.
I think that was
Right.
slightly different because there's that element of everyone could be like, you should be playing Alexander Mitrovic, but equally that didn't mean that Cavallero was a bad player. And I was a big Cavallero guy. I love the guy. I thought that, again,
But that was
someone
all.
who's-
It was all about Cavallero's work rate, though,
His
wasn't
work
it?
rate was
That
excellent.
But that was the point.
But he
of,
shouldn't
like,
have been playing up front. Like, the two things can be true, right? He should have been playing Alexander Mitrovic. That doesn't mean that Cavallero should have been out of the team.
objectively, for a month or so, that Cavallero up front thing was working because suddenly our press was so much better, and Mitrovic was a
Bad
stone.
at pressing, yeah.
Well, also a stone or two heavier and unfit, and all of these things that, like, ultimately, yeah, I think Cavallero's a good shout.
Yeah, it's a great shout, Liz.
I think that might, yeah, well done. Right, that'll do for the pod today. We went a little bit off tangent. With any opinion splitters, though, Fulhamish Pod on Twitter or email us, all the usual places.
And we'll have a full-on argument about them at the end of next week's pod.
Cannot wait.
I'm going to
That's
clip
it.
that bit up of me talking about Andreas and put some like moving music under it.
Honestly, maybe we should. That way, it was like, whew, I was welling up there. Thank you very much for listening and watching the Thursday Club this week. Liz, thank you.
Thank you.
Great Cavalera shout at the end. Jack, thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. Always a pleasure.
We will be back on Tuesday, dissecting everything that happens in that Brentford match. So fingers crossed, we've got a win to talk about. Please, please, please. And
Right,
hope you have
Sabrina.
a good weekend until then. Come on, you whites.
You whites.